Okay guys, just a quick tip I wanted to mention. Doing brakes here on this 2010 Ford Raptor. Kind of neat looking. Got that Baja vibe going all for it. Unfortunately on these ones here, yeah, it's just a 5.4. It's just a regular F150 with a body kit. Regardless, that's not the point, neither here nor there. The point is doing these brakes. Anytime you're doing brakes, you know, you can find situations where you're in a rush, you're not really paying attention. You know, you pull out the pads, give them all a quick look, compare them all. They might look all the same at a quick glance, but you know what, really pull out not just two to compare two, because of course two will be the same, but compare three. He's got little ears. I've seen it happen before. It's easy enough to do, but there is an inside and an outside pad on these ones. If you mix this up, so if we go over to the old ones, you can clearly see here's the outline of the two fingers of the caliper. So this is the outer pad without the ears, and this one here, we can see the two pistons. This is the inner pad, has the ears. So if we go over, let me show you on the other side that's still yet to be changed. So the ears have to be on this side here. It might be a little harder to see, but the caliper, the body of the caliper kind of bows out a little bit at the inside. This facilitates the room for those ears. If you try and put one of those on the front, it will cock the caliper. You can still install it. I've seen it happen. Well, I've worked at a shop when somebody did that because, you know what, they were going quickly, they just weren't paying attention. It happens. But be mindful of that. So the one that I worked at where the guy did it, it didn't make noise right away. But since it's cocked like that, it puts a lot of weird pressure on this front pad, and it wears fast and it wears funny. And then before you know it, once the customer's driving it, it develops a squeal. It just made a wicked noise by the time it came in. Of course, the pads are junk. You know, the rotors were at least salvageable, but you know what I mean? It's embarrassing. You got to pull it back in. It's just something you don't want to deal with. The boss doesn't want to deal with it, all that sort of thing. So always be mindful whenever you're doing brakes. Always what I like to do is, you know, I'll kind of do one side at a time and just kind of match them up, because, you know, that way you can match up squealers, all that. But yeah, sometimes there's very subtle differences between an inside pad and an outside pad, and you might not notice it. So save yourself the headache. Just, you know what, grab them all if you want and just flip them all around, compare them, and then as soon as you spot a difference between the two, then you really pay attention to hey, what's going on here, because also on these the other thing too is these ones here, these nubbins here, they hit the caliper piston, so that also puts them at an awkward angle. But yeah, you just, whenever you're doing pads, give them all a quick look, make sure that there's no inside and outside. Also likewise on your hardware, sometimes these have a top and a bottom. Sometimes they're directional in ways that you wouldn't necessarily think at first, so give these all a quick look too. Is a nice easy thing to do. And then if you spot an oddball, then you start to really pay attention and match them up. Anyways, hopefully this will help you save a headache, and thanks for watching. Okay, I'll squeeze in a couple more tips. Usually when you're doing brakes, you just kind of clean out the surfaces at the bottom, kind of where your hardware goes. More often than not, I don't normally kind of clean on the insides. I just kind of clean kind of the surfaces where the pads ride. But sometimes you find clips like this, and you can see that gap there. I don't know if that'll focus. There's a gap there. So if you find yourself, you're putting some pads in, you put them in and you're really fighting to get that angle in there, or it doesn't seem like there's enough room, maybe your pad's too long, whatever, you got to grind the stupid thing. Check for stuff like this. You see that gap is not going all the way down, so you would have to fight the pads to go in. It's best not just hit them in with a hammer. So when you're putting your hardware in, take a peek for that. If this is the case, pull that guy out, then spots right here on the outside and then on the inside here, just grab a file such as this. Wow, that's one big bastard. Ha ha. Anyways, just grab a file and just go to town, clean that up, try to get all that scale off there, and then they should fit much tighter and much closer. Get rid of that gap, you'll have an easier time fitting the pads. Okay, so as you see, I filed them down a bit, and well, no, hopefully you can see the hardware is sitting much closer. This one fell down a little bit, but you can see I can push it right up. Hopefully that's focusing. That will make installing the pads much easier. You don't have to go crazy with it, just a little bit here and there just to get the excess scale off will work wonders. Okay, so I'll mention one other thing. We're putting the sliders in. So what I like to do is, pull them out, clean them up nice and good, put a little bit of the good stuff on there. I just put it on the tip, and like so. Then what I'll do, hopefully that's not too much in the way, hopefully you guys can still see it. As I'm pushing it, don't push it in straight, turn it in. And then on some of these are more forgiving than others, some are really annoying. What I'll also do is, as I'm in all the way, I'll pull back on the boot a little bit in case there's trapped air. Some of these will have a lot of trapped air and they'll be pushing out really hard, and you just allow any excess grease to come out and any air to come out, and that'll make assembly on certain on certain brake applications, that'll make assembly a lot easier. Okay, and likewise, what I like to do, it's not always possible, but I like to build up the caliper bracket on the bench, clean it up, lube the sliders, fit the pads whenever I can. Sometimes they fall out, they're so loose that it's just more hassle than it's worth, and you're better off putting the bracket on the car first and then assembling the pads. But you know what, if you do have a pad fitment issue, I'd rather deal with it now when it's off. Some bracket designs will have a piece of metal that goes right across. It's kind of hard to fit the outer one, or some of them it's harder to fit the inner one. So whenever I can, I try to do this. Of course, when you're moving it over, you want to be careful, try not to jostle it around, otherwise they'll fall. And then the other thing too, I know everyone's kind of got their own method of doing brakes. When you're putting the bracket on, it really is a good idea, put some Loctite on there. You know what, it's a minor insurance policy, and God forbid you get interrupted, you don't crank them down as much as you normally do. Maybe there's that one time that might save somebody. So I always put Loctite on them, and it's just one of those things make you feel better. Okay, let's time for a rant, if I can squeeze a rant in there, get that out of the way. Rotors, they got that hub surface right here. There's two ways you can put a rotor. This just kind of irks me. The guy is doing some front end work or what have you, he has to take off the rotors, and he's got to place them somewhere. He's going to reuse them. He's not doing a brake job, he's taking off the rotors, maybe he's doing a wheel bearing, maybe he's doing whatever. Goes to put the rotor on bench, places it like that, yeah, right on the actual friction surface. You know what, there's two ways you could put this. You could put it like that. I personally find that easier to grab even afterwards, and that way it's resting on the hub, it's not resting on the actual important surface. Just little things, And another quick little trick that I'm sure most people have seen before. You get a rotor that doesn't have any hold down screws. You're assembling the brakes, it's kind of wobbling all over the place. Say you want to hold it. Now, what I've seen, you know, a lot of times you can use the lug nuts, but if you don't have the wheel on there, a lot of times the lug nuts won't go down all the way, and you gotta thread them in all the way. It's kind of annoying. So what I've seen people do is I've seen people grab a wrench and they'll use that as a spacer, then they don't have to put that lug nut down all the way. But usually what they do is they grab the wrench that's closest, and a lot of times it'll end up being a wrench that they used for the brakes. So I don't like to use wrenches for that. Try to put that back rather than just throwing it in any old way. I always keep a couple various axle nuts or other big nuts, and then this way you have even less threads. You can just kind of do it by hand, kind of shake the rotor a little bit. I don't know if that's all the way on the hub properly. I don't think it is, but good enough. Then that's not gonna, it's not all the way on there, whatever, it's fine. You get the idea. And this will hold your rotor, then you can assemble your brakes. You won't have to worry about the rotor falling on you or pushing pads out as you're trying to get the caliper on. And then it's really easy to take it off. So when I'm pushing, try that again. When I'm pushing in the pistons, I like using these ratcheting guys. They take a little bit to get used to until it's actually putting pressure on the pistons. You know, you move it back and forth, it won't really ratchet. So I don't know if I can do this one-handed. You got to squeeze it yourself, and then as you come back there, so you heard that click, right? So yeah, you got to squeeze it, and I find these work really well. If you got a long ways to go, you might need to put an old pad in there or two to shore it up. I like these because you can put a lot of pressure on there. You know, if you got 2 pistons, obviously if you're doing 4 pistons, it's a pain in the butt not having these. But if you got 2 pistons and they're kind of a big 1-ton diesel and they're kind of crusty, these will push them in, and you can get a feel for them. You can tell if it's binding. You can tell if you're having to push. If you're having to reef, then you need calipers, obviously. But if you're pulling relatively hard, but it's still smooth and doesn't get tighter or not, it's just kind of that same pressure, then you know what, they're probably okay. You can kind of recommend calipers, but you know, that's a lot of money if you start doing every single brake job. I like these a lot. The other thing I find that they're also good for too is if you need a little bit of room, you can put this between an engine and the frame of a vehicle, and you can ratchet it back and forth, give you a little more room, or push some exhaust out of the way, stuff like that. I also got these guys here. You know what, if you got stiff pistons, you're not having fun with these, you typically break them. But you know what, they work good for single piston calipers. You can hook it in just kind of the one side, and you can do that. You know, usually I'll use these for the backs when I can't quite get this in there. So yeah, these are what I use to compress the pistons. Okay, so we got the brakes back together. We got the pistons in, the calipers lubed up, and all the bolts are tight. Couple of things, when I'm tightening up the bracket bolts, those are the ones that are really important. You know, I'll use my impact, but it's a good idea when you're using the impact, push the battery. Make sure you're not down to 1 tick. Make sure you don't have a dead battery, because you know, one of the problems with electric impacts, if your battery's weak, you might not necessarily realize it. You might think you're cranking it up to a very tight setting, but maybe it's only doing it sort of snug. So it's a good idea to check your battery once in a while. You know what, occasionally put a ratchet on there to give it a feel for your hand. That way you get a chance to calibrate your impact, especially if you get a new one that you're not familiar with how tight it is. You know, air-powered ones, they can fail too. I've seen that happen before, where a guy had one that was starting to go weak and he didn't realize it for quite a while. That's one of the reasons why I don't really like using torque sticks. So the other reason why I don't like torque sticks is the noise. You know, you're working next to a guy that's putting 4 wheels on a 1-ton. There's 8 lug nuts a wheel. That's 32 lug nuts, and they're just smashing away on each and every one while you're trying to concentrate on something. It's enough to drive you bonkers. Seriously, it's just about enough to make you say, you know what, stop, lower the vehicle, I'll torque the stupid things for you, just stop making that noise. Yeah, I'm not a fan. I always torque the wheels by hand with a click style ratchet. You know what, if your impact's going, you won't notice it on a torque extension. And also when I torque the wheels by hand afterwards, it gives me a chance to feel my impact, get a better feel for it, constantly make sure, yeah, it's still the same, I'm still pulling it the same, all that. So, you know, check your equipment. You don't want something like brakes coming off on somebody. The other thing, my brain just fried for a second. I can't remember what else I was gonna say about that. Before you get a side assembled, you know what? Give the wheel a shake, a turn. I don't think I'll be able to do it right now with just this by itself. I'll have to put the wheel back on and use another hand. Oh yeah, because that's why my rotor's not on perfectly straight. So let me grab this. I thought that felt a little funny. Hip, there we go. So you definitely, case in point, you definitely want to feel stuff before you ship it. There we go. That's better. So again, this is easier with a wheel on, because then you can spin it faster. Yeah. But yeah, so before you ship it, got some gunk up there. Crap. Yeah, I'll have to clean the whole thing. So before you ship the vehicle, you finish the side. So what I do, as soon as I finish the side, I get a side all assembled, I'm happy with it, all my bolts are tightened, everything's lubed, everything's cleaned. I will then grab the wheel, I'll put it on, and I'll snug the lug nuts on that wheel. That tells me that whole side is done, that whole corner's done. I can forget about it, but I definitely want to spin the wheel. It's really easy to bend this backing plate or dust shield, especially, you know, once it starts getting a little rusty. If this is touching here, or you know what, if a piece of your hardware is touching the rotor a little bit, now's the time to find out about it, because you can easily pull stuff off. If you're on that drive, especially in your big shop, there's lots of other guys around, you got to do the drive of shame, and it's squealing away, then bring it back to your hoist while it's squealing away, and everyone's looking at you, and you got to put it back up in the air, and the customer's waiting, and the boss is expecting it to be done. You know what, it's not a good feeling. So spin it before you ship it. Okay, and I know this sounds basic. I know you don't want to hear someone tell you how to tighten up lug nuts, but I don't like just smashing down on one. I'll go in a crisscross, and I just do, you know, a few clicks at a time. You know, I get it all the way down, and then get it to click a few times, burp, burp. Then I go to the next one, then I go to the next one, go to the next one. You want to be careful. You want to make sure that the wheel is fully seated and it's not slightly cockeyed, kind of like what we saw earlier with the rotor when I had that guy on there. It wasn't on all the way, so everything felt nice and tight, but as soon as I cracked that loose and got that rotor to settle, then everything loosened right up. Same thing with lug nuts on wheels. So I don't go full bore, I'll just do a little bit at a time. Usually the first one I do, if I'm worrying about centering it, I'll only get it click kind of half a time, and then when I'm done, I'll go back to the first, and I want to make sure that that clicks and it doesn't move. If it moves, I keep going, because I want to keep going until I feel at least two that did that, where it clicked and didn't even budge. Likewise, when I'm torquing it, the ideal with the torque wrench, in order for the torque wrench to be accurate, is it needs to actually be able to move a little bit. If you put your torque wrench on there and it just clicks right away, you have no clue what that torque is. It's at least as much torque as you want, but it might be a lot more. So likewise, when I'm torquing it, not only do I want that to click, move a little bit, click, 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 but I will still go back to the first one, especially if when I went to torque them, the lug nuts seem to move a lot. I'll go back to the first one and I want that to click right away right now. If it doesn't click right away right now, then I will just keep going over and over and over with the torque wrench until I get click, 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 that sort of deal. Of course, obviously, if you're doing it over and 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 over, you want to pull it off and figure out why. But you know what? If you do that, if you tighten the wheel down, you hit every lug nut and they all click, and then, you know, say you got a really crusty wheel, really crusty hub, and then you do it all again a second time, and if it moves every single one the second time, then that tells you that thing wasn't seated, and if you let that go, that wheel could have come off. So it pays to give it an extra little due diligence. Make sure it's tight. Okay, we got another little tip. Let's suppose you're doing brakes all around, and let's suppose they're all worn right down. You get something like this, then you go to your last couple of brakes and you push the pistons back in. So you see how far those are out right now. As the pads wear, then the piston has to come out more and more and more and more. So as the piston comes out more and more and more, the brake fluid in the master goes down, 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 down. As you start pushing these pistons out, then that pushes all that excess fluid back up into the master. You start getting to your third or fourth wheel, and all of a sudden you look kind of down here and you see brake fluid hitting the ground. It's also a clear sign that, you know, if you go to a quick lube place, people top up fluids. It's not really a good idea to top up brake fluid. Obviously you don't want to run out if you got a leak, but if you got a leak, you want to address it. I never top up brake fluid fully. If I see it's really low, you know, I might bring it above minimum, but that's what that level sensor is for. Is it's supposed to warn you, hey, your brakes are getting low. It turns the light on because the level's dropped, because your brakes actually are low. But if you go somewhere and someone just keeps topping it up, it'll never set that light on. And you know what? If you're busy, if you're a driver, if you're not a mechanic, you're not going to notice about stuff like this until it's too late. That could ruin a holiday. Anyways, getting back to you pushing the pistons back in and brake fluid starts dropping. Let's presuppose nobody topped it up. Presuppose the level's good. If you do a four-wheel brake job, usually that fluid will come out, just because as you're pushing the pistons in, you're pushing them in further than they would be with new pads, because when you're done, they'll come out a little bit. So you'll push more fluid into there. So what I'll do, if I'm doing four-wheel brake job, in this case I'm not, I'm only doing the front, but if I am doing a four-wheel brake job, I'll do an axle at a time, say the front, usually start with the front, and then once I get the front done, I'll also put the wheel on once I'm done a corner, just to tell myself, yes, I've checked everything, that side's good to go. So I get the whole front axle done, I'm about to go to the rear. So what I'll do, oh, she's a little tight in here. Pull this open. Now I'll get a broom, long stick, not to carry on with the trope of the Canadian, but I used to have a hockey stick in here. It was perfect for this. It was also really good for pulling those handles open when the vehicle's all the way up. But anyways, so you finish the front axle, brakes, get something long, pump that pedal from here. It doesn't have to be perfect, but if you push that pedal, you get those front pads to take up, then some of that fluid level will go down as the front pistons come out. Now, of course, you want to make sure that your rear brakes are still together. You don't want to pump the pedal when the rear calipers are off, or any calipers are off. But if you finish an axle and then you pump the pedal as kind of much as you can, you will allow the master level to go down a little bit, and then that will help you prevent, let's get that dinger to shut up. So yeah, you let the master level come down a little bit, then when you come to the rears, you do your rear brakes, then you won't have to worry about the fluid dripping, you won't have to worry about brake fluid on the customer's vehicle, cleaning that up, blah 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 blah, and it'll just save you a little bit of time as well.